The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783 CE. First, let us talk about the overall cause of the events which preceded the American Revolution. The French and Indian War, which was fought between the British against the French, who were allied with the Native Americans, was a major event. This caused extreme financial hardship for England, who came out the victor, but this caused heavy and at times unfair taxes on the American colonies, which heavily strained the relationship between England and the American colonies. Also, we have the rise of republicanism and John Locke's theories, which caused widespread social belief that all citizens had a right to a voice in government, and when their rights are abused, they have the right to rebel. This belief made the American Revolution valid and necessary in the minds of the American colonists. Next, let us discuss groupings of the causes of the American Revolution. First of these groups are the acts and taxes that were placed on the American colonies by the British, which caused strained relations between the American colonies and England. The Writs of Assistance, the Sugar Act, the Quartering Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Tea Act were all acts and taxes that were placed on the American colonies. The second of these groups is the uprisings and minor instances of rebellion which fueled the fire of division between the American colonies and Britain. The Boston Tea Party, the sinking of the HMS Gaspee, and the Boston Massacre, which was actually not a massacre, but involved the killing of a few Americans by British soldiers who were being harassed by the Americans, were all uprisings and minor instances of rebellion which fueled the fire of division between the American colonies and Britain. The third of these groups is the formal unions which were the voice for revolution. The Continental Association, the Sons of Liberty, and the First Continental Congress were all unions which were the voice for revolution. From these unions came the Declaration of Rights and Grievances and the Intolerable Acts. Also later came the Articles of the Confederation and the Declaration of Independence. Of the causes of the American Revolutionary War, the main cause which started the violence was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which involved the shot heard around the world. Because of the shot heard around the world, violence between the American colonies and England was initiated, thus causing the American Revolution to begin. Next, let us talk about the key events of the American Revolution. These events have been divided up into groups. Group 1. Propaganda and Nonviolent Morale Boost for the American Cause. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which was a pamphlet that was published on January 1, 1776, was a best-selling propaganda piece for the American Revolutionary cause. It convinced many Americans to unify against the British and claim independence. The Declaration of Independence, which was adopted on July 4, 1776, officiated the American claim of independence. Flag Resolution, or the creation of the American flag. This acted as a symbol which unified the American colonists. The legend goes that Betsy Ross created the first American flag with 13 stars in a ring to symbolize the 13 American colonies unified. Next, we have the adoption of the Articles of the Confederation. This unified the American colonies under a single constitution and government. This marked the beginning of the actual American nation. Group 2. Major military-related events. The arrival of Lafayette, who was a Frenchman who believed strongly in the Enlightenment ideals. This aided the American cause and signified international support for the American cause, as well as it also helped convince the French to ally with the American colonists. Next, we have the arrival of von Steuben, who was a Prussian man. He arrived at the winter at Valley Forge, and he turned the Continental Army from a large, unorganized, and undisciplined militia into a serious fighting force. The French alliance and the arrival of French troops, July 11, 1780. This marked the beginning of military support from French for the Americans. Lastly, Benedict Arnold's plans to cede West Point to British are uncovered and foiled. If Arnold had succeeded, the American Revolution would very likely have ended with a British victory. This was foiled by the Culper Ring, an unknown spy ring that helped to ensure American success during the war. The Culper Ring was headed by George Washington, and it was so secretive that it was not discovered until the 1930s. Group 3. Major battles of the American Revolution. We have the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, which was a place of strategic importance that gave the Continental Army a foundation. The Battle of Bunker Hill. It was an overall British victory, but huge losses occurred on the British lines. This caused morale increase of the Continental Army, and it showed that the colonists have a chance to win the war. The Battle of Trenton and Princeton. These two battles marked two huge consecutive victories over the British after a series of losses for the Continental Army. The victory at Saratoga, New York. This is also considered the turning point of the American Revolution. This victory convinced the French to join the American cause and ally with the American colonists. Kings Mountain, South Carolina. This battle lasted only 65 minutes, and the Americans defeated one-third of General Cornwallis's army. This marked a huge victory and a morale boost for the Americans. Group 4. Events which marked the end of the American Revolution. Cornwallis is surrounded on land and sea by the American and the French, and surrenders at Yorktown, Virginia, on October 19, 1781. This is considered the last major battle of the American Revolution, which officiated an American victory of the war. The British signed the Articles of Peace and the Treaty of Paris. This marked the official end of the American Revolutionary War, with a victory for the Americans, and it signified the recognition of the American colonies as an independent nation by England. The U.S. Constitution was ratified on September 17, 1787. Which marked the beginning of the United States of America under its Republican Democratic government as is known today. As there are many key people of the American Revolution, there are only a few which need to be discussed. George Washington, of course, led the Continental Army against the British. King George III was the King of England at the time of the American Revolution. He would not give the Americans their independence, and later he signed the Treaty of Paris, giving the Americans their independence. General Cornwallis was the last of the English generals to fight against the forces of the American colonists. He failed. Benjamin Franklin went over to France during the American Revolutionary War and convinced them to join the American cause. Finally, let us not forget that there were loyalists to the British who resided in the American colonies and were American colonists. Lastly, let us discuss the outcomes of the American Revolution. Obviously, as we all know, the colonies won. There was government reform in Britain due to the American victory, and other revolutions were inspired by the American Revolution, such as the French Revolution. Katie, Melanie, Snakehubs, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation about the American Revolution. Lisa Van Eysden rocks.